There is a certain kind of person who spends half of their life believing something is wrong with them. They were never the most popular, never the one who naturally dominated every room, and they often felt they noticed things everyone else preferred to ignore. For years, that feels like a flaw until time reveals something unexpected. Have you ever noticed how some people become more fascinating as they grow older? Why do certain individuals develop a stronger presence while others slowly fade away, even though they constantly seek attention? What if the very thing that always made you feel different is the same thing that will one day make you unforgettable? Most people believe time steals beauty and charm, but perhaps it simply strips away the masks. And when that happens, a difference emerges that can no longer be hidden. Some spend their lives trying to become someone they were never meant to be. Others finally find the courage to exist without asking for permission. Maybe you've felt this without ever knowing how to explain it. Maybe you spent years lowering your intensity just to fit into places where you never truly belonged, hiding your questions, your silence, and even the way you feel so you wouldn't seem too complicated. But eventually, that effort becomes heavier than loneliness itself. That is the moment everything begins to change. True magnetism is never born from the need to impress. It appears when someone stops living for approval and finally begins to occupy their own space without fearing other people's discomfort. Almost no one notices that quiet transformation at first, yet it completely changes the way the world responds to them. For a long time, you may have believed that being different was a problem that needed to be fixed. While everyone else seemed to fit naturally into groups, conversations, and expectations, you kept wondering why you never truly felt like you belonged anywhere. It was as if you were watching life through an invisible wall. You were always there, yet there was a small distance between who you were and who people expected you to be. Perhaps you were told you were too intense, too sensitive, or too quiet. Little by little, you learned to hide parts of yourself to make others more comfortable. You smiled when you didn't feel like it, agreed when you wanted to question everything, and reduced your depth so no one would feel uncomfortable. The problem is that every time we abandon an authentic part of ourselves to gain acceptance, we also lose a part of our own vitality. The strange thing is that this conflict rarely disappears. It simply becomes quieter. Life goes on. You work, build relationships, and fulfill your responsibilities. Yet there remains a constant feeling that you're performing instead of living. Your body notices that exhaustion before your mind can explain it. A fatigue appears that is difficult to describe, as though simply existing requires far more effort than it should. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung's words reveal an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps your suffering never came from being different. Perhaps it came from endlessly trying to hide that difference. The more energy you spend maintaining an image that others will accept, the less remains to build a genuine identity. That is why uncommon personalities often flourish later in life. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because there comes a point when pretending costs more than finally becoming who they have always been. And that is exactly where a transformation begins that few people recognize at first, yet it completely changes the way that person carries themselves wherever they go. Now, here's something important to understand. Have you ever felt that just when you needed to be mentally strong, your mind completely fell apart? That isn't weakness. It's a lack of mental structure. No one taught you to train your mind the way you train your body. That's why so many people remain trapped in patterns they never consciously chose overthinking, emotional outbursts, and unhealthy dependence. But there is a way to reprogram those patterns without empty motivation or feel-good slogans. It's a system built on science, practical philosophy, and disciplined, strategic thinking. There comes a point in life when the mask starts to feel too heavy. It does not happen overnight. It is a slow, almost invisible kind of exhaustion. You keep saying the right things, maintaining the attitude others expect, and playing the role you spent years creating. On the outside, everything seems fine. On the inside, an uncomfortable question begins to grow. When did I start living just to meet everyone else's expectations? Youth often rewards those who know how to perform well, those who please others, avoid conflict, and quickly learn what they should reveal and what they must hide. For a long time, that seems like a smart strategy. After all, being accepted brings a sense of security. The problem is that this security comes with a silent price. The more perfect the image you build, the farther it drifts from the person who truly exists behind it. Eventually, small moments begin to expose that growing distance. A shallow conversation starts to feel more exhausting than it once did. Crowded places no longer impress you. The approval that once seemed essential begins to lose its appeal. Not because you have become cold or indifferent, but because something deep inside starts demanding authenticity. As Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Looking inward, however, is rarely comfortable. It means facing old fears, recognizing desires that have been buried for years, and admitting that many of your choices may have been driven only by the fear of rejection. This encounter does not bring instant answers. Instead, it often creates even more uncertainty. The old identity begins to collapse before the new one has fully taken shape. That is exactly why so many people mistake this stage for a crisis, when it may actually be the beginning of a profound transformation. The mask does not fall because life has failed. It falls because it can no longer support someone who is finally ready to live more honestly. The rarest personalities often experience this process even more deeply. Because they never completely fit into society's expectations, they eventually discover something many people never find: the freedom to exist without relying on constant approval. From that quiet freedom comes a presence that cannot be imitated, a presence that grows stronger with time instead of fading. There is a huge difference between appearing strong and being truly whole. For much of their lives, many people learn to build an image of strength simply to survive. They hide insecurity behind confidence, cover fear with endless work, and turn the need for approval into an endless pursuit of achievement. It works for a while, but every identity built to impress others demands constant maintenance. A truly integrated person lives differently. They no longer feel the need to prove they are intelligent, interesting, or important. Their energy is no longer spent protecting an idealized version of themselves. That creates a rare kind of presence. When they join a conversation, they are not carefully measuring every word to make a good impression. They simply listen, respond honestly, and remain fully present. In a world where almost everyone is trying to appear to be something, the person who simply is becomes impossible to forget. Real change doesn't happen because life suddenly becomes easier. More often, it begins after loss, disappointment, and moments when everything you believed seemed to fall apart. Gradually, you realize that fighting your own imperfections is a battle you were never meant to win. Then, something unexpected happens. You stop running from yourself. The moment you do, a tension you once thought was normal begins to disappear. You no longer feel the need to hide your sensitivity, control every emotion, or reshape your personality to fit the people around you. What once looked like weakness slowly becomes balance. Vulnerability is no longer something to be ashamed of. It becomes a source of clarity. Your flaws stop feeling like enemies and become part of who you truly are. You no longer apologize for your existence. This quiet inner wholeness is what makes certain people unforgettable over time. They don't stand out because they try so hard. They stand out because they no longer have to. There is a calmness in someone who has made peace with themselves that no communication technique can imitate. That is why some people leave such a powerful impression. They don't rely on rehearsed answers or try to impress everyone they meet. Their way of living simply proves that it is possible to exist without carrying the burden of pretending to be someone else. That quiet freedom awakens something deep inside those who are still exhausted from hiding their true selves. During youth, many people believe they must always be seen to be admired. They spend years chasing attention, approval, and recognition. But with time, a truth appears that few are ready to accept. The strongest kind of attraction never comes from wanting to be noticed. It comes from the peace of someone who no longer needs anyone else to validate their worth. Unusual personalities reach this point in a different way. They don't become magnetic because they mastered social skills or built fake confidence. They become unforgettable because, after years of facing their own contradictions, they stop wasting energy trying to control what other people think. There is a quiet confidence in those who are no longer bargaining with their own identity. That alone changes the way they move through the world. They speak less, but every word carries meaning. They listen carefully because they are no longer obsessed with giving the perfect response. Their silence no longer feels awkward. It feels reassuring. Ironically, the less they try to appear interesting, the more people are drawn to them. At first, this idea sounds contradictory, but it explains much of what happens as we mature. Real transformation is not about discovering a perfect version of yourself. It is about slowly letting go of every false version you created just to survive, to be accepted, or to meet other people's expectations. That is why so many people confuse getting older with growing wiser. Time simply passes. Maturity begins when every painful experience stops being only a memory and becomes a source of understanding. Those who reach that point no longer hide their scars. They no longer see them as signs of failure, but as proof of someone who kept moving forward, no matter what. Perhaps that is why some people become almost impossible to forget. Their presence does not linger because of what they own, how much status they achieved, or how impressive they appear from the outside. It remains because of something far more subtle. At some point in their lives, they stopped carrying the invisible burdens that weigh most people down. They no longer feel the exhausting need to prove that they are intelligent enough, successful enough, attractive enough, or worthy enough. Instead, they have reached a quiet alignment between what they think, what they feel, and the way they live. In Jungian psychology, this kind of inner harmony emerges not from perfection, but from the lifelong process of individuation, the gradual integration of the conscious and unconscious aspects of the personality into a more complete self. That quiet coherence creates a kind of confidence that cannot be manufactured. It cannot be bought, rehearsed, or carefully edited. It is not the confidence of someone trying to dominate a room. It is the confidence of someone who has stopped fighting an internal war. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries hidden dimensions within the unconscious, aspects of ourselves we reject, suppress, or simply refuse to acknowledge. The more energy we spend hiding these parts, the more fragmented our personality becomes. Yet when someone has begun to reconcile with those forgotten parts of themselves, something changes in the way they move through life. Their words require fewer explanations. Their actions become more consistent. Their presence alone communicates a sense of stability that others instinctively recognize. We live in an era where almost everyone is encouraged to construct an image before discovering an identity. Social media has transformed personalities into carefully arranged displays. Relationships are often reduced to performances designed for approval, while emotions are filtered, adjusted, and presented as polished content. Every day, people compete to appear happier, wiser, wealthier, and more fulfilled than they truly feel. Beneath that constant performance, however, many experience profound loneliness because maintaining a mask demands enormous psychological energy. This is precisely where Jung's understanding of the persona becomes more relevant than ever. The persona is the social mask each of us develops to function within society. It is not inherently harmful. In fact, it is necessary. We all adapt our behavior depending on the circumstances. The problem begins when we mistake that mask for our real identity. The longer we live exclusively through the persona, the further we drift from our authentic nature. Eventually, we begin performing even when nobody is watching. That is why encountering someone who simply exists without desperately seeking validation feels almost shocking today. They do not appear authentic because they are flawless. They appear authentic because they no longer invest their lives protecting an illusion. Their imperfections are visible, yet strangely reassuring. Their confidence does not depend on constant applause because it was built through inner confrontation rather than external admiration. Perhaps this is one of the deepest lessons hidden within genuine maturity. The people who truly leave a lasting impression are rarely those who spent their lives chasing admiration. They are those who had the courage to descend into their own inner world, confronting fears they could not escape, accepting emotions they could not control, and facing contradictions they could no longer deny. Carl Jung often emphasized that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of the darkness within. Real transformation begins the moment we stop running away from ourselves. Very few people are willing to take that journey because it is uncomfortable. It asks us to question beliefs that once protected us. It asks us to recognize insecurities hidden beneath confidence, anger concealed behind sadness, and perfectionism, masking a deep fear of rejection. The unconscious does not disappear simply because we ignore it. It continues influencing our decisions, relationships, ambitions, and emotional reactions until we choose to understand it. This explains why two people can experience the same number of years yet become completely different human beings. Time alone changes no one. Years merely expose whatever has been cultivated beneath the surface. If someone spends decades feeding resentment, comparison, bitterness, and denial, those qualities eventually become impossible to hide. The face may age, but the unresolved conflicts become even more visible through expressions, habits, and relationships. On the other hand, if someone dedicates those same years to honest self-examination, accepting responsibility for their inner life instead of blaming the outside world, something extraordinary begins to emerge. Their presence becomes calmer, their words become simpler, their need to impress quietly dissolves. They become the kind of person whose silence communicates more than another person's endless attempts at self-promotion. This is not because life suddenly became easier. Quite the opposite. Most people who radiate genuine peace have endured profound disappointments, painful losses, broken expectations, and moments of deep uncertainty. The difference is that they stopped expecting suffering to disappear before allowing themselves to become whole. Instead of waiting for perfect circumstances, they transformed adversity into psychological growth. Jung understood suffering as something that could either imprison the individual or awaken them. Pain itself is not transformative. It is our relationship with pain that determines whether it becomes a prison or a doorway. Every disappointment carries the possibility of revealing unconscious patterns. Every emotional wound contains information about fears we have not yet understood. Every crisis invites us to become someone different, provided we are willing to listen rather than merely resist. Perhaps the greatest discovery is not that some personalities become increasingly attractive as they grow older. The true discovery is understanding why this happens. It is not age that makes someone unforgettable. It is the courage to meet oneself honestly, again and again throughout the years. Time merely reveals what someone chose to confront within themselves. While many dedicate decades to perfecting an image that earns acceptance, others choose a far more demanding path. They seek self-knowledge instead of applause. They ask difficult questions instead of collecting easy approval. They gradually learn that external recognition can never replace internal integration. This decision often goes unnoticed by the world, yet it quietly transforms everything. The individuals who affect us most deeply are rarely the ones who seem perfect. Instead, they possess something much rarer. Their presence communicates authenticity. Around them, there is no constant pressure to perform. Their humanity gives others permission to reconnect with their own. They are not free because they never experienced fear. They appear free because they stopped resisting who they truly are. Carl Jung described individuation as the lifelong process of becoming the person one was always meant to become. This journey does not erase contradictions. It teaches us to hold them consciously. We remain capable of strength and vulnerability, certainty and doubt, confidence and humility. Psychological maturity is not the disappearance of inner conflict, but the ability to live without being controlled by it. Perhaps you have spent years believing your depth was a flaw. Maybe your constant search for meaning made you feel different from everyone around you. Perhaps your discomfort with superficial conversations convinced you that something was wrong with you. You may have learned to hide your curiosity because others called it overthinking. You may have silenced your sensitivity because the world rewarded emotional distance. You may even have convinced yourself that becoming simpler would finally make you acceptable. But what if none of those qualities were ever burdens? What if your desire to understand life more deeply was never evidence that you were broken? What if your discomfort with superficiality was simply an indication that your psyche was calling you towards something more authentic? Jung believed that each individual carries an inner blueprint, a unique psychological path that cannot be replaced by imitation. Following that path often requires walking away from collective expectations. It demands becoming who you are, rather than becoming who everyone else expects you to be. There is an enormous difference between growing older and genuinely maturing. Aging happens to everyone. Maturity requires conscious participation. It requires abandoning identities that no longer reflect who we are. It requires accepting imperfections instead of endlessly hiding them. It demands looking directly at our shadow without allowing it to dominate our lives. Above all, it requires continuing forward, even when certainty never fully arrives. Many people spend their entire lives searching for final answers, imagining that one day every doubt will disappear. Yet, psychological growth rarely offers absolute certainty. Instead, it offers increasing honesty. We stop pretending to know everything. We stop pretending to control everything. We stop pretending to be someone we are not. Ironically, it is through accepting uncertainty that genuine confidence begins to emerge. Perhaps the rarest people are not those who were born extraordinary. Perhaps they are simply those who remained loyal to themselves while the world continuously encouraged conformity. Every generation rewards imitation because imitation feels predictable. Authenticity, however, is always disruptive. It challenges assumptions without speaking loudly. It invites reflection simply by existing. So, before this reflection comes to an end, allow yourself to carry one final question beyond these words. When every role you play eventually falls away, when every achievement loses its power to define you, when every expectation placed upon you dissolves, when every mask that once protected you finally slips to the ground, who will remain looking back at you? Will it be the person you spent years trying to become for everyone else? Or will it be the self that patiently waited beneath every mask, every fear, every performance, hoping that one day you would finally choose to meet it? If you have stayed until this moment, thank you for sharing this time with me. We live in a world where attention is fragmented every second, where distractions compete endlessly for our minds, and where genuine reflection has become increasingly rare. The simple fact that you remained here until the end says something meaningful about the questions you carry within yourself. Questions like these are not signs of weakness. They are often the beginning of transformation. While reflecting on these ideas, I remembered a period of my own life when I believed I needed to resemble everyone around me. I watched people gain acceptance with remarkable ease, while every conversation felt like an exhausting performance. I constantly adjusted my opinions, softened my intensity, concealed my curiosity, and hid the parts of myself that seemed too deep, too emotional, or too different. For a long time, I believed my greatest problem was simply being too intense. Only years later did I realize that my intensity had never been the true burden. The real weight came from pretending to be someone more comfortable for everyone else. Day after day, that quiet performance slowly disconnected me from myself. The exhaustion I felt was never caused by authenticity. It was caused by abandoning it. Perhaps you are living through that silent struggle right now. Maybe no one around you realizes how much energy it takes to keep wearing masks that no longer fit. Maybe you have become so accustomed to adapting that you have forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without fear of judgment. If these words have given language to something you have felt for years but could never fully explain, then this reflection has already fulfilled its purpose. Because the journey Carl Jung described was never about becoming someone new. It was always about having the courage to become who you have always been, beneath every expectation, every fear, and every mask. And perhaps, from this moment forward, that quiet journey can finally become your own.